actually we're going to tweak that slightly because that actually suits us better, which is perfect, which is exactly what is needed, because we don't necessarily know how that tool in practice will actually work in that particular location. So we'll tweak a little bit, or we'll let them tweak it the way they want, the way that works for them.
I know that, Nick, you were sort of in a hybrid model a little bit in terms of being inside of Save the Children, which has its own, I'm sure, internal learning, traditional sort of L&D function. Your program is absolutely outward facing and a program that's aimed at driving scale and local activity. But what do you think that those of us in the private sector can learn from the humanitarian sector, and what you've learned as you've done your work at the academy? Are there things you think that are there lessons that we can all benefit from?
I think so, though I don't want to sound, know-it-all at all. But I think that there are a few things that we've learned, and obviously they don't seem like rocket science, but I think they're still interesting lessons for us to take. The first one is that we really need to listen to the learner, and for an organization to the employees' needs, and making sure that when we create learning, we create something that is engaging, interactive, high quality, and that is not just your box ticking exercise. I need this particular person to go through an induction, so I will create this learning pathway that will enable that will be a simple either video that will enable them to just click at the end and say, fine, I've completed that. But actually making sure that we engage as we create engaging learning. And I think one of the things that we've been trying to do, and through the platform, because we have now so many users and learners on that platform, we're starting to gather quite a lot of data that we can use. And I think one of the pieces that we're trying to take out of that is how do we understand better how learners would like to engage. And sometimes it will be quite clear from the data that you're saying, if, for example, a large majority of people coming onto your platform, and that could be one of your internal platforms, learning platforms, comes in and searches for monitoring and evaluation, somehow you must have a gap in there, and you can be proactive in trying to actually address that particular gap. Or if you have learners looking at a video and switching off after 20 seconds, you've got a problem with that particular video that you've created because it's not really engaging. So there are ways that you can actually start looking at data to be a little bit more effective in the way that you create learning. So one of the other thing that private sector organizations can learn or can benefit from humanitarian organizations is the context, because it is not necessarily the case that private sector organizations who would like to invest or work in a particular country know actually, what is the context and how do things work there, and what does that mean when I'm trying to get into a country that has just come out of a crisis or out of conflict, natural disaster, and better understanding, what are the pressures that employees there may face, or even government ministers may face. So, understanding a little bit better the context. And for that, some of the things, for example, learning that we've created are giving you an impression of where, how things are and what are the choices that are facing people in those particular countries. And you could have a VR experience or an AR experience where you create a certain empathy to understand better, what are the issues facing that particular country. And it could be simply, well, there's no electricity, so how are we going to deal with those kind of issues? How is the environment in which I might come to invest? And I think some of the learning that actually humanitarians have could address or could help private organizations with it.
Two things there. One is just because you're going somewhere to help. In fact, maybe even because you're going somewhere to help, it's very important to understand the local culture and constraints and approaches if you're to do your work effectively. And that's just as true in the private sector as it would be in the humanitarian sector, especially when those systems are under pressure, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Exactly.
You talked about VR and AR in that example. I did want to touch briefly, if we can, on how you thinking about learning technology and the future of the academy. What kind of experiments are you running, Nick?
Right. So we really very much trying to stay. We're really trying to stay at the cutting edge of what we're doing. So innovation in learning is really important, and obviously our agenda is also making sure people can learn around innovation. But so some of the things that we're doing, and it's really interesting, are around indeed VR. Virtual reality, where we've created 360 videos, one of which is around it immerses learners in Marawi, which is a conflict-torn city in the Philippines, and basically you are someone who is actually facing whatever context you're in, which is a war-torn city. And it's a very powerful movie, 360 film that we have created, and really creates a real empathy towards, how do people react or respond, or how can they respond? When you look at the film, it's quite telling, the choices that you have to make. Another recent one that we've done is on Ebola, and it's the same type of thing, but it's more of an interactive film where you have choices. When you're faced with different choices, where you're immersed in someone responding to potentially to the Ebola crisis, and what are the choices that you have to make? And I think this is really quite a powerful film that we're trying to do.
One thing that struck me before you give another example, these films are super powerful, and the kind of work that people in this sector do, it's staggering how they put their security on the line and the sort of emotional intensity of the environments where a lot of this work happens. And I can imagine how helping people prepare for that in any way has to be useful.
Yes, absolutely. And we feel that this is really important, not just because it is VR, but because of exactly that, because it creates that empathy, because it enables people to really understand what are the key choices that either victims have to make, or responders have to make when they get somewhere. And I think these are really powerful films that we can make. And it's not making VR for the sake of making VR, because obviously we could make VR out of anything, but it's really because of the role that VR can play in learning. And one of the other work that we're trying to do as well, and we've worked with the Institute for the Future, and we have been looking at trying to understand what are the skills and what are the skills and tools that will be the right ones to have, say, in 10 years' time. So what are the current, what can we see, what is happening in the humanitarian sector globally, and how do we need to adapt the skills of potentially the humanitarians responding? Because I think right now we are in a very specific model that we have, which we discussed a little bit previously, which is the architecture of an international organization responding to a disaster, and now trying to build local capacity to to be able to respond by themselves to those disasters without needing the agency of an international organization. But now the question then still remains, which is, what are the kind of skills that we're looking at, given the uncertainty that we're facing in the world in 10 years? And what are the key little pieces that will really help us understand that? So it's not really fortune telling at all. It's really saying these are the few things that we're seeing will be disruptive or might be disruptive in the sector, and we all need to be prepared to look at what skills we have globally or locally, and see how best we can respond to those needs.
That's really fascinating. I'm very familiar with the work of the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, and are you now sort of responding to that? Are you building course material that will help prepare future leaders?
Yes, exactly. So we've developed a MOOC with them on humanitarian futures and foresight. And another piece that we're trying to see how we can take that forward is exactly that, is how do we work to develop and build the capacity of leadership, be it globally, but also locally. And these are really powerful tools that help leaders, that can help leaders make the right decisions in the directions, in terms of the skills that their employees need to have.
This is really interesting stuff, Nick, and there's lots and lots we could talk about, but I think we have time for maybe two more questions, standard questions that I usually ask. First of all, where can people go to perhaps watch this extraordinary film, You Can't Argue with a Flood, or see the kind of learn more about the Academy?
So you can find all those details and the film on our website, which is the Humanitarian leadershipacademy.org. All our two platforms are, you can find them on kayakconnect.org and HPass.org.
Really interesting work that you're doing. We didn't really get a chance to dive into HPass, which in and of itself, I think, is a really interesting idea that you guys are incubating. Lots of great stuff happening. So I would encourage people who are interested to go and check out your resources. And then last question from me is, a lot of people in the learning space, and certainly a lot of people in the humanitarian and international aid space, are inspired to do their work. It feels like special work. Was there somebody or something or an incident or a mentor that inspired you to do the work that you do, Nick?
I think I would have to actually go back to probably to my parents, who took me in their suitcases as soon as I was, I think, four weeks old. They took me to Afghanistan, where my father was working, and we ended up sort of traveling in various countries where he was based. He was working with the German Technical Corporation. So I kind of, I guess my story began there on that, tarmac, going to Afghanistan, 4 weeks old, and I guess, looking at the work that he was doing, looking at trying to figure out, okay, how can we actually, be able to better make things just work better, and not have that constant. And I think for me, this has been the work that I've then been doing in say in Zimbabwe or in Tajikistan or elsewhere, really reinforced that vision that for the moment the architecture is really humanitarian architecture is really around international humanitarian organizations that are coming into a country and responding to disaster while and retreating when funding dries up, and forgetting in the process to actually build the capacity of local organizations and enabling them really to be the ones that become able to respond. And I think having then worked myself in this field, I think I became even more passionate to make sure that this happens. People in Bangladesh or in Bahamas, they are responding. They are not waiting for anyone outside of the Bahamas to respond. they live there. They don't have a choice, and they are just responding and pretending that this is not the case is probably a false logic. And I think that's really what inspires me.
Great. Well, thank you so much.